So welcome to the talk about STAC Browser. I'll be giving an overview over the recent developments in STAC Browser. Like it has been released, I don't know, a couple of months ago as version 3, which is a complete rewrite of the original version, which has been developed years ago. Yeah, let's get into it. So what is STAC Browser? It's a web user interface for STAC and STAC APIs. And with STAC, I mean static stack catalogs. So we have both under one hood. And it has been rewritten from scratch in JavaScript, giving a lot of more functionality. For example, now you have a new customizable user interface. So beforehand, you didn't have any options to really customize it. Now you have various options to customize it at your logo, at your color schemes from your company or whatever. And also like have different plugin options to actually customize the behavior of it. There is full API support now. The old version didn't support APIs. Really, you could like request items and collections, but then if you hit pagination, it wouldn't work. And all the extensions from the API were also not implemented. That has been added. Search is fully incorporated now, both for items and recently also for collections, including multiple other things that we will talk about later. There's some authentication support as well, API tokens, OpenID Connect, etc. Due to funding from Canada, we've also multi-language support now, which is available in German, English, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian. If you speak another language and would like to use STAC Browser in your language, please go ahead and translate it. There are now language files you can translate easily from any of these languages, and then it runs in your language as well. Clean URLs. The old version still had like very long URLs and like a base 58 encoding or something like that, so you wouldn't really know what the structure underneath it. It got pretty long, and now we have clean URLs, which include all the paths from the actual catalog, so it's more like search optimized for Google, etc. as well. And there's also additional metadata, like the old version just had assets, links basically. You could just click it and it downloads. But also like recently in the new version of STAC in 1.0, we moved more towards metadata and assets, like the projection extension, for example. And that's now also fully rendered for each asset. So there are now, in all of the slides, on the right side you will see a demo, basically a GIF that is showing what's going on here. And the left side is some information. So here you see how switching through different languages works. So if you have corresponding links in your static stack catalog or in the STAC API, it also loads the corresponding data in the corresponding language. So if you have a German and an English-speaking catalog, and want to switch through it, and the STAC Browser supports German and English as well, you have a full localized version basically, including all like using commas instead of dots in numbers, etc. It loads the corresponding data from the server as you see here. For example, that the values on the right change accordingly, the title change as well, and the catalog, depending on the language that you have. For Arabic, for example, you see that there's only a catalog for Arabic, but there's no translation in STAC Browser in Arabic. Then it defaults back to English, requesting English. Yeah. Authentication support has also been added. We have integration for OpenID Connect, which is shown here in the for Planet, basically. So basically, if it encounters a 401 or 403 HTTP error, it redirects automatically to the OpenID Connect login flow. You can authenticate, and then it redirects you to the page. It has an access token in the memory, and it can request all the data according to that. You can also configure API tokens with some authentication config that is down here as an example. And you can say, well, depending on where your API token goes, it could be sent via the header, or it could be sent via query string, and you can configure which key it has. Like some have just key, some name a token, right? And depending on that, you can configure that. You can also configure like a text that pops up when you encounter 401 or 403 permission error. that then you can say something like, please get the API token from our, I don't know, token page or something like that, right? So that people are guided towards how to get the token. There is now a tree browser as well that allows very quick navigation through the catalog. You see that you can quickly like expand all the catalogs and collections and get a quick overview instead of just navigating through it in the STAC browser and so on. So that is maybe a quicker way to explore the structure of a catalog. The metadata rendering has been improved a lot. It now supports a large number of extensions. And it's extensible also for custom extensions. So if you have a custom extension for a company or for any data that is not like a in the STAC extensions organization, you can register that pretty easily, as the code shows here. Like there is a phosphor-G extension added, for example, and then a metadata field whether that shows, depending on the value, whether phosphor-G is cool or not, right? So if you have some values that are not automatically rendered correctly in STAC Browser, it tries to guess the right thing based on the data that it finds, but sometimes it doesn't work. Then you can go and customize it using some code in the config and make it render nicely. There's also like support for some of the more advanced extensions, like the label extension, for example. If there is an item that has linking to a GeoJSON and to the COG source data, then it renders here, as you see, the actual COG file and loads the GeoJSON with the labels on top of it. Recently, we also added charts to the STAC browser. For example, if you have the stats extension or histograms, it renders them nicely. So here, the stats extension, for example, or histograms are now rendered nicely instead of just showing the numbers. And then there's also COG support directly baked in. So it tries to get the default or an ideal rendering from the metadata and directly displays it on the browser, so you can zoom in, etc., and it loads without even needing a tile server. That's available for COGs because there is good JavaScript support for GeoTIFF due to GeoTIFF.js. There is no way yet to, like, for example, visualize GeoZar, GeoParquet, or Copic, but it would be great to get that in the future. But I'm mainly developing STAC Browser and not the underlying libraries. So once something comes available there, I'm happy to integrate that, but there is no real support for this in the browser right now. Yeah, what has also been added is like that you can, once you have search results or like lists of items or collections, it renders them on the map. That was also not present before. There was just the bounding box usually on the map. Here, for example, it displays the thumbnails correctly in the individual bounding boxes, and then you can click it and directly navigate to it. Otherwise, often the items are very like, you don't only have the IDs as a title and don't really know what it is or so. So you can directly use the map to navigate through. That makes it probably much easier to find the right item that you need. There's also now support for collection search, including CQL and queryable, which have been added in OGC API features. So that means that by default, you only get temporal and spatial extent search, of course, through the STAC API specification. But you can also add CQL, and that means you have a list of queryable that you can expose via your API. And then the browser directly reads that and offers you additional possibilities, as you see here in the add filter. If you click that, it shows all the queryable. You can select them, customize the operator, whether it's greater than, smaller than, equals. And then depending on the JSON schema that you provide, it offers you a nice form. Like if you have an enum, it offers you a select box with all the values. If you have a minimum maximum values, it offers you some kind of slider that you can choose the right value that is between min and max values, etc. And then from that, it generates a CQL and sends it to the server. There's also now free text search. So if you implement any of the free text search extensions, either in collection search or in item search, it also adds a search term field, and then you can just type in any word, and then it searches for it if the API supports it. There's now also actions for assets. That is completely new and unreleased. It's still in the development branch. And what it does, it is that you can define a short class here, as it shows below, that adds different types of actions for the asset. So if, for example, you can define that if the asset type here is, for example, the one for Copic, then it shows the button, and then you can define an action or a URI. And for example, in this case, it would add a button for open in the Copic viewer, and then it directly adds the href here to the Copic viewer URL. And then if you click that in the browser, it opens the Copic file in the Copic viewer, basically. That is a bit to mitigate the issue with what I just said, that I can't render Copic and GeoZar, for example, in STAC Browser. But of course, now you can add different actions that open them in different tools. For example, in Copic viewer, in cogeo.xyz, in Felt, in what else do we have? In GeoJSON.io or whatever of external software that you have, and you just pass in, for example, the asset URL, and then it does something with it. That is the functionalities more from the user side. There are some things that you can do to improve your API and catalog so that it works better in the STAC Browser. And that includes, for example, to provide meaningful link titles. What I see often is that you have nice titles, for example, in the collection and in the catalog, but there is no link title in the actual link that points towards this resource. And then what happens in the browser is that it just shows some kind of title that is built from the URI. And then by loading in the background all the resources, the front end, of course, needs to update while loading the titles and update all the boxes. And then it starts to flicker and go around, etc. And if you provide the titles up front in the link, they directly stay as they were. And then it's just a more consistent interface without any updating in the background once the data is loading. Also, it's good to always provide root parent and self links for navigational purposes. If they're not there, it still works if you're in a single session because it stores a state, but if you refresh the page, that's gone and then you can't navigate anymore. So if you share a link with a colleague or so, and there are no root parent and self links, they can't navigate, they just see what is there, and then, it's out of context, basically. It's also always good to provide consistent thumbnails, especially with regards to the size, so that you can pre-render or leave space for the thumbnails, because otherwise this flickering starts again and moving of boxes, because by default it doesn't know that there is a thumbnail. Then it starts loading the data in the background and adds all the thumbnails again, and then the boxes get larger, of course. So this is interesting, of course. Either you provide them consistently or you add the proj shape to the thumbnails and then know it's in advance which size it has. There's also a way to customize STAC Browser through the root catalog. So if there is, for example, a demo instance that Radiant Earth hosts on GitHub Pages where you can input your URL and then you can browse without hosting your own. But in that case, of course, all the options that STAC Browser has that you may set in your custom deployment are not present. So you can add a STAC Browser key with various options that STAC Browser supports, and then it directly renders that or uses that as options instead of the ones from the demo instance, which makes a much nicer experience for users. Also important for assets, especially raster assets, is that you provide band statistics, no data values, and projection for ideal cog rendering. And of course, that you validate your data. When I'm going and testing STAC Browser against instances, half of them are if I just run a validator against it, it gives invalidated results. So it seems the data provider never validated their data, which is of course not ideal. There are two STAC Browser extensions, let's say. They're not really extensions, but it recognizes if present, so that you can make a nice UI or so. There is an email field in a provider object that you can set. And there is an icon relation type for icons, so that if you have icons that are not like thumbnails are usually large, but if you want to just give a nicer user interface, you can add icons, for example, for each individual catalog, and then it just looks a bit nicer to users. And then that's what I already talked about. There are a couple of options that you can set in the STAC Browser field in the root catalog, and then it recognizes these options and optimizes it for your catalog, depending on how you want it to be. Yeah, the work I've done on STAC Browser was mostly funded through these entities. Radiant Earth gave the base funding for all the STAC Browser work, National Resources Canada for multi-language support, Space Bell for collection search, Planet for OpenID Connect and the Actions plugin. And I also invested a lot of my own time into it, so thanks to all of them. And if you need anything in STAC Browser, you can always contact me and we can speak about how we can get things into STAC Browser. That's it.
Okay, so are there any questions? We have plenty of time for questions.
Okay, question.
Yes.
So let's say I have a catalog and I have my own extension in it, and, and I want those field names to show up properly in STAC Browser. How can I specify that?
So that was this slide here. So like this example here, right? You have an extension that has a prefix usually. So you go ahead and say registry add extension, and then you add the prefix here and the label of the extension, basically. That registers the extension. And then for each field, you can do a registry add metadata field in a config file, and then define the field. Here in this case, phosphor-G is cool, right? And then add a specification. That is the STAC fields extension that does it. It has its own specification, like something like a JSON schema, but for STAC fields, basically. And one of the fields, for example, label. And then the label would be rendered here. Then like at the label, it would be saying, is phosphor-G cool, right? That's the label. And then the formatter would do either, depending on whether the value is, in this case, true or false, render sure or meh, right? So that's how it would go. But like all the, or most of the STAC extensions have been defined in STAC fields and are present by default. Just if you have like custom ones, for example, for Planetary Computer or so, MSFT, you can add those. But it, like, if they are not present, it tries like automatic way to do it by default. So by default, for example, it removes the phosphor-G and would just like capitalize it, right? It would say is space cool in the label. So it tries to do some guessing on how it would look best by default.
Are there any other questions? I have a question just because I didn't know about this software, so 3 already, so I'm just wondering, in terms of the history of the project, when did you start it, and have you built a community around it of other developers?
So version 1 and 2 were basically the same. It was just like one breaking change that moved it to version 2. So I mean, it would really be version 2, I would think. And version 1 was built like when STAC started, I don't know, 5 years ago. That was pretty much just one person doing it. Nowadays, it's, well, often also me doing it, but with funding from companies. So often they just come from me, but sometimes we also get PRs for changes in there. So there's a small community around it, but it's used quite a lot. So often I just browse around the web and find randomly STAC Browser instances for STAC catalog. So that is pretty nice. Yeah.
Great. Last chance now. Yeah, there's a question.
How does it scale? I have never used STAC Browser before, but like how many data sets can be published that way? So
I would say that depends on your implementation of the server side, because it basically just shows what's there. And what it does, like if you do, usually if you like have hundreds of collections in one list, you would start doing pagination on the API side already. And then it just shows pagination here. Similarly for items. Yeah, I mean, if you have such a large response body that it can't fit in the browser memory, then you should probably think about how your API implementation works, right? But yeah, I've tested this with thousands of items on one page and it worked flawlessly. So that I hope is not an issue right now.